except for you. Good afternoon. It's just after 5 minutes past 1. My name is Elise Hatton and I am Rockhampton Regional Council Smart Hub Business Manager. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Hub Live. I have a phenomenal guest today, especially if you are either planning on or in the process of building a tech startup. I have the perfect guest with the perfect topic for you today. My guest is none other than the amazing Colin Kinner from Startup On-Ramp. And not only is Colin very experienced in starting and running a startup, but also really experienced in sharing knowledge and education. How are you, Mr. Colin Kinner?
I'm pretty good. That was quite an intro. So we're going to see whether I can live up to all of that. But thanks for having me.
I'm very confident that you're going to be okay. It's wonderful. Thank you for joining us. So Colin, tell us a little bit about Startup On-Ramp. Where did it come from? How long has the company existed? Just give us a bit of your background and the background of the company.
Yeah, sure. So Startup On-Ramp is something I started about 4 years ago. Having been involved with lots of startups as an investor, I've run a couple of early stage funds, run accelerator programs, incubators, mentored lots and lots of startups. And over a long period of time, working with hundreds of startups, I kept seeing people making the same mistakes. And you've probably seen a lot of them too, right? People do things that in a startup, it's not like a regular business. So if you're running a cafe or a retail business or an accounting firm, the rules are pretty predictable. But in a tech startup, you're almost by definition engaging in business model innovation. So you're trying a business model that nobody's tried before. So I thought it would be really handy if we could create a program that helped people who are starting their first tech startup to learn from all the people who've gone before them. And, on the one side to say, well, what are all the things that people screw up? What are the things they get wrong inadvertently, unwittingly, but that are actually really unhelpful to the success of their company? And, people are pretty smart, so they can say, right, well, I'm not going to do that because that's going to lead me to failure. And then on the other side is, what are all the things that successful entrepreneurs have done that have been really useful, that have helped them to speed up their journey to success? So in Startup On-Ramp, what we basically do is we run a whole bunch of different programs in various formats to give people a quick exposure to best practice. So it's basically saying, what are all the things that you probably should be doing and some practical guidance on how to go about doing them. And what are some of the things that you should really try and avoid because they're not going to be very helpful. We've had about 250 people go through our programs nationally so far. We've had some really good companies come out of them, and we might get onto a few of those if we have time. We've also had a bunch of people that have been through the program and said, all right, well, I've now realized my idea isn't going to work, but I've realized that really quickly and cheaply. So, we also count that as a success.
Absolutely. Okay. So how exciting. Let's go back and go right to the start and say, can you please define what the word startup means? Because what it doesn't mean is a new company, right? That's not what startup means. Tell us what a tech startup is.
Sure. There's a lot of terminology that needs to be unpacked here. So a startup, in my view, is a business that starts small, but if it's successful, could become massive very quickly. Usually they're going for a global market rather than a local market. And generally they're using a combination of technology, and technology might be, it's on the internet, or it could be, pointy technology, technology that's come out of research or that actually involves some, science behind it. And as I was saying before, they almost always engage in business model innovation. So they're trying something that hasn't been done before. So if you're starting a business and you can predictably say, I know what this business is, how it's going to work, and I know who our customers are, and I know how we're going to make money, and I can project for the next three to 5 years of kind of cash flow forecast. That's not a startup.
Okay, so talk to us just quickly about when you use the word business model. What is it that you mean?
So a business model is it's more jargon actually. So if you look at a business, right? So what makes a business? Solving a problem for a particular customer, getting paid somewhere along the way. So you need revenue, and then you'll have some costs, right? So at a really basic level, a business model is those things. It's saying who is our customer? What problem can we solve for that customer? How are we going to make money? And what are our costs? And, you know, obviously you have to make sure that your revenues exceed your costs at some point. Otherwise, you're not a business. So a business model is really just setting out those core things.
Okay. And when you use the word innovation, because you use those two terms next to each other, so business model, innovation, when you use the word innovation, what do you mean?
Oh, you're asking all the right questions, Elise. This is good. So innovation to me means doing something that's different, new, different. There are different levels or degrees of innovation. The sort of innovation I really like to see in any startup is new to world innovation, right? So this is something where you're going to do something and you're going to be the first company to do it. You don't have to be literally the first in the world, but you don't want to be the thousandth, right? So if you look at Dropbox as an example, everyone knows that, you know, Dropbox is now a very widely used file sharing backup tool. Dropbox was about the 11th such thing to come into existence. So when it started in 2007, Drew Houston, the founder, basically said, we know we're not the first to try this. We're going to be about the 11th because Microsoft and Google and a bunch of other companies were doing similar things. But they had just done it really badly. And so the way Dropbox succeeded was to say, well, we think we understand why our competitors have done a bad job of this, and we know how we're going to do it better. So that's the ideal sort of innovation, is where you're in the first handful of people to do something anywhere, because that means that you can capture the whole market potentially. The least valuable kind of innovation is kind of incremental innovation, or even some people view this as kind of technology adoption. You know, hey, we're a hairdresser and we take phone bookings, but now we're going to have online bookings. That's technology adoption, and I guess it's innovation. And if you're running a hairdresser business and you're not taking online bookings, then you probably should, you know, engage in that little bit of innovation. But that's not a recipe for creating a global company.
Okay. I love the example that you just used with Dropbox, right? So they had competitors, and in fact, they had the huge, biggest companies in the world as competitors. But they entered the market and captured the market, and they won that race. And so they did the some things right, and I want to use the word that you used before. They rose to the benchmark of what needed to be done. Now, is this what a startup on-ramp is? Like, does it show what to do, not to be Microsoft in the Dropbox example, but how to be Dropbox?
Yeah, it does. Although, you know, there are a lot of things that Dropbox has done in the, beyond the first year or two that are well beyond where we operate. So where startup on-ramp can be valuable to people when they're starting companies is anything from idea stage. So we've helped a lot of people who's literally have said, I had an idea in the shower. You know, could I do your program to see whether the idea is viable? So we can help people a lot there, right through to maybe about 2 years into their startup. So we've certainly had people that have gone through our programs, and you would know some of them who've kind of said, well, look, okay, I've now realized that there are some things that I probably should do differently. And I feel like about 2 years in is about as far as you'd want to go before you don't want people to get 2 years in and then go, everything I've done is actually a waste of time. You know, I've met a lot of founders who are like 5 years into building their business, and it's been a long, hard slog, and they've done a lot of things that actually haven't worked. And then someone's explained to them why those things haven't worked. And, you know, it's heartbreaking, because they kind of go, well, I've put my life savings into this. I put 5 years of my life into it. So I personally feel really strongly that it's super important to help people really early on, so that they don't have that kind of, you know, long gestation period of doing things that are not going to help and wasting their time and their money.
Absolutely. Now, we just discussed this just before we went live. This is Startup On-Ramp has very, very good timing on your behalf. Startup On-Ramp became an online program. Or did you say May this year? Or March?
We launched in March. Well, our founders course, which is our online course, launched in March.
Okay, so that was exceptionally good planning. Tell us a little bit about that course, and show us, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, step us through what the course covers,
Sure.
because we actually offer this amazing course right here at the Smart Hub. And then after that, we'll talk about some examples of some of the companies that have gone through that course. But first, maybe we can just talk about the course itself.
Yeah, for sure. So where we started when Startup On-Ramp launched was we started running a program called a pre-accelerator, which is a 12-week program for people who are working on a startup idea. And it was workshops and mentoring and a pitch event at the end. That program is still running in quite a few places. It has been affected by COVID because obviously in a lot of locations, particularly in Victoria, it's been pretty difficult to get in-person groups together. So yeah, about this time last year, I decided it would be a good idea to create an online version of that program that people could do in their own time without having to come and do a face-to-face workshop. And so we spent quite a bit of time building that, and we interviewed about 20 startup founders, experienced founders, some investors, some venture capitalists, lawyers, people that have got really deep skills relevant to lots of different aspects of starting a company. And we created that course and we launched it in March. So yeah, we were either very wise in predicting that it would be important to have a fully online course, or the timing was a bit lucky. I'll take either. But that program's now up and running. We've had a couple hundred people go through it, and it's getting rave reviews because it is something that people can learn all the basics of how to start a startup and do it in their own time at their own pace. And I will share my screen so we can just give you a quick overview of what's in that course. Or maybe I won't.
Oh yeah, no, it went. You shared the screen.
Let me just try that again.
Okay. There we go. Perfect.
Okay, have you got can you see the module breakdown?
Yes, we could just before. Yes. I wonder why. Hold on, let me just see. Yep, we can see it. Perfect.
Okay, so you'll see what you'll learn, yes?
Yes, what will we learn?
Okay, so in the Founders course, we asked ourselves the question, what are all the things that every startup founder should know a little bit about? So we're not going to make you an expert on any of this, but we're going to give you enough information that you can at least get off to a good start. So we've broken it into 3 sections. The first is modules 1 to 10, which is startup essentials. And that's starting with a lot of terminology. So where we started this conversation was, what are all the buzzwords that people need to understand? So we dealt with some of that. We look at what makes startups succeed and what makes startups fail. So this is kind of looking at a pretty high level to say, what are the kind of big buckets of activity that you as a founder should engage in that will increase your chances of success, and what are the things you should avoid? And then a little bit about testing your idea. Then the next part of the course is about launching your product. And it's really going into a bit more depth on using an MVP, which is another bit of jargon that stands for a minimum viable product, to test your idea with customers. We spend a lot of time talking about how to interview customers, ideally before you spend money building an MVP. We talk about building a team. We talk about the legal structure and some of the legal agreements that you'll need to have in place. We spend a bit of time talking about how to pitch. Pitching is another bit of jargon, but for anyone in a startup, there will be heaps of opportunities to tell people about your company, tell them about what you're working on. And so pitching is just explaining to people why it's valuable. And then we have the final part is about growth and funding. So assuming you've validated your idea, how do you grow that, either using digital marketing as a tool? How do you raise money from investors? We put in a module on diversity, and it's actually led by Sarah Moran from Girl Geek Academy, on the importance of diversity, because I think that's one of the topics that's often overlooked. And Sarah actually makes a really good point in that module, which is that if you don't consciously bake in diversity in the first 6 to 12 months of your company, it actually gets really hard to do it later. So if you end up, if you're a guy and you end up with, the first 10 people in your company are all white males that in their mid-30s, it gets really hard for you to then say, well, oh, geez, we better try and diversify the kind of makeup of our team. And then we talk about navigating the ecosystem. So, you know, wherever you're located, how do you get value out of the local community that exists around your startup?
This is awesome. Awesome, awesome. So tell me about some of the success stories, both those who have succeeded and those who have not, you know, found that they should stop their startup. Tell me about some of those companies.
Yeah, so we have a few companies that have been through some of our earlier programs that are now no longer startups. They're you know, globally significant companies. So one example that I am still pretty closely involved in is a company called SurePact. So they're an enterprise software product for project managers. And what their product does is give people who are managing large, complex projects a better view of all of the moving parts of the project so they can better manage risk. And that's a company that was started by a lady called Megan Avard, who actually has a deep background in complex project management. So she was leveraging, you know, 20 years plus of domain expertise. That's something that actually I think is really important, is being able to say to yourself as a founder, am I going to leverage some really deep domain knowledge so that my startup has a really good chance of being successful, rather than the alternative I see where, you know, people have been let's say that they're in banking and finance, and then they say, hey, I'm going to start a social network, or I'm going to start a, you know, or conversely, they're you know, a school teacher and they want to do Bitcoin.
So you think that's one of, do you think that is one of the hallmarks of a successful founder, is that they're leveraging the expertise that they already have?
Yes, I think there are very few examples that I've seen of successful startups where the founder was learning about the domain that their startup is going to go into. So I think it's almost essential that the founder has to have deep domain expertise.
Nice. Okay.
Do you want to give you another example?
Yes, please. Give us more examples.
Yeah. So one that I'm actually having a bit of a play with their product at the moment is a company called Replica Studios. So the founder, Shreyas Nivas, actually did our pre-accelerator a couple of years ago, working on a totally different idea. And during the course of that program, he realized that what he was working on just wasn't going to be successful. And look, this is something that some people will go, my idea is not going to work. I've learned from customers that no one's going to pay for it, so I'm just going to stop. Shreyas did what I hope good founders will always do, which is to say, well, okay, I'll stop working on that, but I've got 5 other ideas. Which one will I work on next? And so his next idea was to use artificial intelligence to create synthetic voices. And so he's built a company that is using AI, or artificial intelligence, to take samples of a person's voice and then allow them to synthesize that to create voices for lots of different purposes, whether it's games or audiobooks or you know, web apps. And they got accepted into the Techstars Music Accelerator in Los Angeles about a year ago. Nice. And then came back to Australia and raised $3.7 million in funding, and they're continuing to grow. So they're a great example of a company that's actually working on their second thing, but making a really good go of it.
That's amazing. Hey, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm here with the absolutely incredible Colin Kinner from Startup On-Ramp, and we're talking about what it takes for a tech startup to succeed. And also, we're just talking about some examples of really great tech startups that have been through a Startup On-Ramp program, which we offer here at the SmartUp, and we'll get into a bit later. So tell us more about some of the companies that have actually gone through your founder program.
Yeah, look, we actually see, particularly in a lot of regional areas, we see people who are building businesses that wouldn't, on first glance, look like a tech startup. They might be building a physical product rather than just a software product. But I still think that's really interesting as an opportunity. So I'll give you an example. The company I'm thinking of was actually building a boat anchor product. So it's a heavy engineering product. And it's a new design of an anchor for boats. And the founder of this company basically said, well, I'm a recreational fisherman. I like to go fishing, but I always kept getting my anchor snagged on rocks and on coral, and it's the design's really not very good. He happened to be an engineer, And he said, well, I just thought, well, for my own purposes, I'd build another improved version of a standard boat anchor. And he did, and he used it for a while, and it was actually really good. And then some of his mates said, well, oh, that's interesting. Could you make one for me? And he ended up, he'd made a handful of them. And then someone said, you know what? There's probably a lot of other people that are using the old style boat anchors that you could sell this to. So he's now building a business that is going to sell this new design of anchor globally. I said to him, how many people are there in the world that, how many boats are there that this would be relevant to? Because it's only for a certain class of boat. And he did the research, and he came back a week later and he said, about 300 million.
Wow. That's a big market.
Good. That's an opportunity that we should really go after. So he's going after that really big market. He's not going to be manufacturing 300 million anchors in Australia and putting them in a Australia Post box and sending them to people. But what he will end up doing is being an intellectual property licensing business. So he will actually license the rights to manufacture that country by country, and then have manufacturing relationships in lots of places where they can manufacture it locally and then ship it shorter distances. And he will make money while he sleeps by having those manufacturing partners pay him a license fee.
That's amazing. That's a really great example of an innovative business model. So how he's going to make money is different to how you would imagine, he's selling boat anchors to boaties. No, that wasn't it. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Do you have any other examples that you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, we've got, I'm actually working with some companies in Germany at the minute. We've done a partnership with a German accelerator connected with our founders course. And it's really interesting to see the different kinds of businesses that exist in other places around the world. And so I'm working with a company that's in Berlin at the moment, and they've launched an app called Wonder, which is helping people to remain accountable for goals that they decide they're going to set for themselves. It could be a fitness goal, it could be a learning goal, like I want to learn a new language, or it could be something as simple as I want to do yoga 3 times a week. And so what they found is that people spend something like $40 billion per year accessing the content that helps them to do those tasks. So, signing up for courses to learn languages, or, online or in-person yoga classes, all that kind of stuff. But only about 3% of people that pay the money get the value, because they drop off, right? So it's the attrition problem. We all know it from gym memberships. Every time anyone signs up for a gym membership, the gym goes great. There's a 90-something% chance you're not going to show up after the first 3 months. So what they do is they basically have an app that helps people remain accountable for the task that they've signed up for, by matching them with an accountability buddy and helping them to get through it that way. And they're growing like crazy, and they're getting a lot of interest from lots of potential partners. And so that's another really interesting example of something that's solving a really specific problem, but it's actually a really big one.
That's amazing. That's incredible. Okay, so share with us maybe the 3 to 5 tips or bits of information that any startup founder needs to know to not obviously to succeed, but to help them along that way, along that path.
Sure. Well, let's start with my favorite one, which is don't spend $1 building anything or on any part of your business until you've talked to customers. So the biggest thing that I see causing startups to fail is the founders will say, I've got a really good idea. I'm sure it's a good idea. Maybe they'll talk to a couple of people. One might be their sister, and the other one, might be their mum, and they get the pat on the head that says, "Oh, that's a great idea, dear," and they go, "Great, I'm going to do it." And fast forward 12 months, and they've spent $100,000 of their own money, and they still haven't got any customers, and it's not looking good. So the first thing people should do is go and test their assumptions with customers. So figure out who your target customer is, and by test your assumptions, I don't mean go and pitch the idea to them and see if they'll tell you it's a good idea, because actually that's really unhelpful. People are they're trying to be helpful and supportive of entrepreneurs, but what they do is they tell everyone that's a great idea. So if you go pitch your idea to someone, chances are they'll say, "Oh, that's great, love it," but that means absolutely nothing. So the test that people should try to do is to go and ask those customers what problems they have. So if you said so to take SurePact as an example, right? So project management. What Megan Navard, the founder, did early on was to go and interview a large number of project managers. And she didn't say, hey, we're building the software product and would you buy it? She said, tell me what is really hard about managing projects. And what keeps you awake at night? And what are the things that go wrong that you wish you could do something about? And all those kinds of questions. And then what that does is it allows you to understand at a really deep level what problem you're going to solve with your company. And then you can go and solve it.
So if you mentioned before that you need a large market, right? So I'm just imagining someone in a regional center trying to build a tech startup. And where do they find enough diversity in the market? Because if you go down the high street of Rockhampton, for example, you're going to get very different answers, even if you were to ask the same people in Brisbane, and never mind New York or Berlin. So how do you overcome that problem?
Well, it's actually a whole lot easier today than it used to be because of COVID. So we've got this interesting situation where, despite all of the challenges of a global pandemic, it's actually a whole lot easier to get people anywhere in the world to jump on a call or a Zoom call and have a chat. So I think it's about identifying exactly who your customer is and saying, right, who is that person and where are they and how do I get hold of them? And so you can do that by using your LinkedIn network. You can do it by word of mouth and saying, well, let's say you're building a product that's for dentists. You can say, well, okay, I can go see the 5 dentists that are in my area. But then I can say to them, who else do you know that I could go and interview to understand this problem more deeply? And also to see, if dentists in New York have the same problem as dentists in Rockhampton. So that's a really easy thing that you can do.
Okay, awesome. So LinkedIn and then Zoom. Really, that's the solution.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, what's the second part? What's the second bit of information that you could share with us that'll help us succeed?
Yeah. So it's kind of related to the first one. It's actually setting out your assumptions in falsifiable statements. So a lot of people kind of have some assumptions that their business is based on. I always say that every startup is just little more than a walking set of untested assumptions, right? So your job as the startup founder is to go test them. But what people often don't do is to actually write them down and articulate them as falsifiable statements. So, if we use the dentist example, let's say I'm building an app that helps dentists to better plan their day. Okay, so my set of falsifiable statements would start off with something like, I believe that dentists have a real problem in planning their day. And then I might say, I believe that that's because, dentists have appointments that run longer than expected, or, whatever other assumptions I have around why that's a problem that I should go try and solve. And then if you go and test those very specific assumptions, it gets you a much better answer than saying, here's roughly the idea that I've got, and is anyone interested in it?
Okay, love it. So point number 1, go and talk to your customers. Do not spend 1 cent on building anything. Find the people that you think will buy this thing that you're going to build from you, and talk to them and ask them. Don't ask them whether they like your idea. Don't even pitch the idea to them.
Totally.
Just ask them about their problems.
Totally.
That's step 1. Step 2 is, and linked to that idea, is write down exactly the assumptions that you've made. And based on the conversation that you're having with your customers, you're either going to go, yep, I'm correct, or no, I'm actually completely wrong. Here is what it looks to be. And then that becomes your second assumption.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, awesome. What's the third bit of advice or information?
Yeah. So the third one would be to look at the skills that you're going to need inside your company. So depending on the kind of product that you want to build, if it's a software product or something that's on the internet and you need someone who can actually, create that tool. If you're a programmer, that's great. You can probably do it yourself. If you're not, and we certainly see that the overwhelming majority of startup founders in Australia are non-technical or maybe a little bit technical. So that's a really crucial one, because I've seen way too many people spend a lot of time working on a company only to realize that the cost to build and deploy their product is more than they can afford. And it seems kind of crazy, but software developers are not cheap, and good software developers are potentially quite expensive. What often people will do is they'll say, right, I'm going to go do all my customer interviews. That's great. I'm going to understand the problem and ask all those good questions. Then I'm going to build a pitch deck so that I can go and raise some money from investors. And then I'm going to find a software developer. Maybe it's an agency, maybe even offshore it if they decide that they want to do it that way. And then get the bill for $50,000 or $100,000. The largest amount I've actually seen for a person spending money on a as yet non-launched product is about $250,000. So don't do that. Don't spend $250,000 of your own money. So what people can do early on is to actually start engaging with software developers, not to get them to build your $250,000 thing, but to just say, what would this look like? Is there a way that I could deploy an MVP, a minimum viable product, that isn't anything like the full product that I have in my mind, but that will allow me to get something out there and see whether my target customer actually thinks it's interesting or not. And sometimes an MVP can be basically a one-page website with a sign-up form, right? So depending on the kind of thing you're building, it can be really, really cheap and quick to deploy. So that's probably another really important area is find out what you can release to your target customer really early and really cheaply.
Okay, wonderful. And do you have a fourth and a fifth?
Oh, we could keep going for ages.
Yeah, let's talk about one or two more.
Yeah. Okay. So another one that I think is really helpful is to figure out with your team who's doing what. And so not everyone has a team. So some people start out as a sole founder, but some people start off with the team. They say, right, there's 2 or 3 of us, and we're all in this together. It actually doesn't matter. What I try and get people to do is a thing I call a founder alignment exercise, and it's a one-page kind of canvas thing that says, right, it asks 3 questions, 4 questions. First is, why am I doing this? Second is, what am I willing to put into this company? And that might be time, money, reputation, whatever. The third question is, what do I want to get out of this company? Is it millions of dollars? Is it fame? Is it I want to be my own boss? Is it something else? And then the fourth question is, how do I define success for this company? Does success mean that we have 100 offices around the world? Does it mean that I can retire at 55? Whatever it might be. If you're a sole founder, do that exercise and then sit down with your family or your spouse or a good friend and just walk through it and give them the opportunity to kind of question you on it and say, right, does that make sense? And is that realistic? It gets really interesting when it's a team of people and you can sit down with, your co-founders, each fill in that kind of one-page Q&A thing separately and then come together as a group. And it's if you watch the conversations that come from that, it's usually pretty interesting because, there's lots of cases where you get one founder says, well, success for me means I can work 3 days a week and this will, pay my mortgage off before I retire. And then the other founder says, no, I want to create a $100 billion company. Okay, well, we need to chat.
I love that. I think that's even relevant to, just SMEs who have partnerships. I think if you ask those 4 questions, I think you'd find a lot of misalignments and then a lot of the reasons why it's so difficult sometimes to work with partners. I absolutely love that. Okay, so Colin Kinner, the Founders Program, you have very generously, through the help of Advanced Queensland, made that available to co-working spaces, to innovation ecosystems like this, like the Rocky one and like the Smart Hub, all across Queensland. Yep. And so people can access Startup On-Ramp by coming to us and asking us whether they can do the program. Now, just give us a very, very quick rundown. How long should people expect this should take? I see that there are 30 modules. Just give us a very big overview of what that would mean if someone wants to do the program.
Sure. So the program is about 8 hours worth of content, so pre-recorded videos and interviews with founders, investors, and so on. it's split into 30 modules. So the average length of each of those modules is about 15 minutes or so. So it's very bite-sized, digestible chunks. We've deliberately done that so that, if people are even like, while you're eating your sandwich at lunchtime, you can do a module. Or instead of sitting on the sofa and watching an hour of Netflix, you can find a couple of topics that are going to be helpful. We have seen people do the founders course in anything from a weekend, like literally they just do it in I've seen
just
one person
binge watch it.
I've seen one person binge watch the whole thing stop to finish in one go. I wouldn't recommend that. We've had a few people
be information
overload for more than 2 months.
Okay.
So the average is about 5 to 6 weeks. And that gives people enough time to not just consume the content, but also to reflect on it. We set a bunch of tasks in quite a few of the modules. So, for example, we might say, go and complete a lean canvas, or go and do 10 customer interviews, or go on and create a pitch deck that you might, then use as the basis for pitching an investor at some point in the future. So I think it's really helpful for people to spend the time doing those tasks, and then we give them feedback within the online course. So there's a discussion forum where we can give them some feedback on what they've been working on. And then obviously the value, if they do it as part of an organized activity, such as with the Smart Hub, is that then they can tap into all of the additional expertise that you've got in terms of being able to say, right, well, what should I do? I'm at this point, and kind of tap into some of that advice and expertise.
Wonderful. Okay, so here's what we have to offer at the Smart Hub. If you are super keen to get into this founders course and you want to start today, all you have to do is to message us, private message us, or even comment on this link, but a private message is probably going to be better. And my team will get back to you, and we will put you in onto the course. There's also mentoring and coaching that we can offer at the Smart Hub. However, if you prefer to do it as a cohort, we will be offering a cohort, so a group of people can go through the course together, and that'll happen early next year. So really, just if that's what you would like to do, again, just send us a private message so that we can make sure that your email address is on our database. Or if you like our Facebook page, of course, you'll get all of that information. So in the first quarter of next year of 2021, we will be offering Startup On-Ramp, and you can be part of a cohort and go through it in a more structured way. I think it probably will still be very much delivered online. We will use that model because no one knows what's going to happen with COVID, and it just makes it a lot more flexible for people. But again, the coaching and the mentoring will be available at the Smart Hub as part of that process. And, as Colin said, there's actually things to do. So it's action, not learning, but activity that gets you the result, not just, academic learning. So consuming the content. It's what you go and do after you've consumed the content that will really give you the answer. And so we would encourage you to do that. And we would also help you execute some of those homework items and also hold you accountable. So if you are interested in this absolutely incredible course, please feel free to private message us. Colin, if people want to connect with you directly, how can they do that?
They'll find us on the website is startuponramp.com, and they'll also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Twitter we're probably most active on, but we're everywhere. So, yep, happy to chat to people.
Awesome. Mr. Colin Kinner, thank you so much for sharing your insight and your knowledge and all of the experience that you've had and all of the examples. They're really interesting with us today at our HubLive. And we will look forward to seeing you again next week for another HubLive at 1 o'clock on Thursday. See you then.
Thanks, Elise.